I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the F1 podcast. It is season 5, episode 7. It is Andrew Clary, and for the first time in season 5,
Woo.
we have Erica
Do a barrel roll.
Hollingsworth.
Yeah, I'm back. This is so exciting. I was away for Ooh.
Drip too hard. There you go. Welcome back, Erica. How you been?
I'm good. It's been a busy kickoff to 2025 as a whole, but I'm glad to have my feet back underneath me after focusing on some stuff, getting some rest, and coming in at what's a pretty, I would say, interesting point and reflection point in the season so far.
We've had 5 races. They all have been kind of different in its own accord. But today we're going to talk about Jeddah. It was actually kind of like a microcosm of what the season's been sort of so far. Really good qualifying. The race, yeah, kind of okay, kind of boring, depending on how you view it, right? Controversial in some cases. But going into this weekend, Erica, what were your kind of overall thoughts on how McLaren had performed to this point in the season?
I mean, as a McLaren fan, I'm obviously so thrilled. I think back to what was it, 2 years ago? I remember us watching the first race of the season
Yeah.
in Trinity Common. I think Oscar DNF'd and Lando pitted like 6 times or something
Yeah,
like that.
and Aston Martin had a podium, and
You
it's been like a
lose.
complete role reversal in that
Yeah,
time.
it has. We've come a long way. So clearly I'm thrilled. It's been really great to see that Oscar's having a lot of success. I know he got a taste of it last year. Lando was getting some of his first wins under his belt as well. But to have two drivers leading the championship and kind of duking it out amongst themselves on this team, which we haven't really seen, I think, in several years now, two drivers from the same team. I mean, at one point, I'm sure we had both Max and Sergio at the top of the grid within the last few years, but as the season drags on, you get your Ferraris and your Mercedes and your other people mixed in there as well. So um, I'm quite pleased. We've seen a lot of good action. We've seen some great performances from the rookies as well. Some
Mhm.
not so great performances from the rookies already causing some movement within the teams. And I think that as we continue to go into the rest of the season, because we're already a fifth of the way done, which is a crazy thing to say, we're going to see even more exciting changes and developments from all these teams as we see who gives up on the car looking ahead to 2026 regs, who's really trying to make the most of what they have going and get as many points and dollars and everything in the Constructors' Championship as they can. So,
Like for me personally, I alluded to it last episode. I think, this is the time when you stop putting resource money in for Aston Martin because,
yeah.
when you have Lawrence Stroll who's going to spend money like it's, $10 for him is like $10,000 for us sort of idea, right? He doesn't care about the money. He'll spend, spend, spend to make his team competitive. And at this point, you might as well put everything you can into that 2026 car. There's really no point tank for a good season next year. It's a very North American concept that's going to be brought into the team, but it is what it is.
It is what it is for sure. And I think there's a few other teams who have thought similarly. I know last year at the Canadian Grand Prix, it was when the 2026 regs had just been
Mhm.
released, and people were asking James Vowles, like at the Williams meetup and kind of interview he was doing for everyone. And he was saying that really, they're doing what they can with the current regs in this season, which seems to be going relatively well with the two drivers, but it was eyes on the future. And I think that's pretty well where just about everyone is putting their money and their resources at
Well,
this
and the
point.
thing too is like a team like Williams, a team like Haas, they need as much money as they can get. So they really need to kind of perform well and try to be as up high in the midfield as possible to kind of make that much money to help support, next year's budget sort of idea, right? So every team is different and unique in that case. That's why I think Aston Martin has that luxury from a cost cap perspective that they'll be at the salary cap, they'll be at the cost cap every year no matter what. It's just that resource time that they need to be allocated in order to be competitive from 2026 onward. But nevertheless, let's get into the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Qualifying was really fun. Out in Q1 though was Bortoleto, Ocon, Hulkenberg doing and Stroll and Erica. With that, Stroll overtakes I believe it was Kevin Magnussen as the most eliminated driver in Q1 history with like
Oh my God.
75 Q1 outs.
75 Q1 outs. Oh my goodness. Wow, I did remember hearing the commentators announce that he is now the most eliminated driver in Q1 history. An obscure, also the cat says hi,
Hey, Ollie.
little factoid to bring out. So much so that I think at first they thought he was within 300ths of the cutoff. So they protested it only to then find out he was a tenth off, which has just got to be so demoralizing.
And it's
But
crazy because he has a pole position to under his cap, Turkey 2020. So it's so polarizing to be a person, you know, he's lost a lot of confidence, I think, over the past few years in that team. I don't know if his heart's really in it anymore because he has moments of brilliance, but then, consistency, he's the most limited driver in Q1. That's gotta hurt a little bit.
especially when if we think about the cars and the drivers we've had over the course of the last years, I don't think anyone would put him or Aston Martin as one of their picks to be in that position. I mean, Haas has really struggled for a few years. Sauber has been doing so terribly for the last few, and even some of the drivers that have been racing for them. I get that some of them, had breaks from the sports and came back, like with Hulkenberg, but nonetheless, it is a little shocking to me. But it's even more shocking when you consider some of the other things. I can't remember if it was Alex Jakes or Jolyon Palmer, but they were saying that this is an era where the driver truly is what makes the difference. It's not the car, it's not the development, because with this series of regulations and the way everyone is developed and the cost cap and things of the like, it's really kind of narrowed the differences between them all, and everyone really is in more or less equal machinery. And we saw that in qualifying and in the race. We just didn't have the same kind of gaps or leads or lapping that we've had in times past.
Like if you
So,
look at a race like let's say 2021 when we first started the podcast, right? I think at Zandvoort, Bottas, Hamilton, and I think Verstappen were the only three drivers to finish with like to end on the total amount of laps that were
yeah,
subjected. Everyone other was a lap behind, right? That's insane. When you think like from four on to 20th was a lap behind the top three.
yeah,
It's insane. But I think today or those past races, only like four or five people were lapped and finished a lap
exactly.
behind.
And it was only in the last, like, I want to say 5 to 8 laps that we were hearing some of the guys at the front of the grid complaining about the dirty air
Mhm.
from the folks who were a lap behind. So, I mean, I think it makes it more exciting for a lot of folks to watch a race because you're getting a bit more action throughout the course of it. And, every decision really does matter a bit more. But if you're Lance Stroll, you're probably a little deflated going into your race on Sunday.
Well, there was some news that kind of came out today that we'll talk about at the end, but it was a rumor and maybe kind of leads to Lance Stroll not being at an Aston Martin seat anymore from, if
Interesting.
we move the pieces around. But Q2, we had Berriman, Hadjar, Alonso, Lawson, and Albon. Albon was a bit of a surprise considering that the Williams were fast this weekend, but anything catch your eye there with regards to those Q2 outs?
Yeah, I would say Albin was a bit of a surprise given how we've seen things go this season. Signs has been looking pretty strong in the Williams, all things considered as well. I do think it has maybe highlighted for Williams, like Albin really did seem like that nugget, that future for the team, but then you have signs come in right away off the get-go, and he's outperforming him fairly consistently and significantly in a lot of ways too. So I was a bit shocked to see that. I truthfully thought, especially on a track where you're trying to pull every ounce of speed out of the car, because I think they're saying it's like Monza with walls was what they were
Hmm.
calling
Yeah.
it. To see that he wasn't able to pull that same kind of speed out of it when he has shown us he can do pretty crazy things with the Williams, all things considered.
Yeah, and I don't know. To me, if you're not, this is a really technical track in my opinion because of how close the walls are together. It is like super fast corner after super fast corner. There's very minimal in terms of low speed corners, so you got to be completely hooked up every lap. And again, as Jake's put in, as you mentioned, it really is about the driver. And when I think of the top 10, unfortunately, Alonso's just not in a good car. But otherwise, I'm not surprised. A lot of young, inexperienced guys, maybe Albon, again, the surprise there. But going into Q3, to me, those are the top 10 drivers in form this
Yeah.
season and have really been able to hook up their car when needed to. So I think that was that consistency kind of led throughout in terms of like who would be in Q3.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, seeing who made it to Q3 was not as much of a shock. I think maybe the position of the bottom 10 that were out in Q3 and Q2 was maybe where there was some confusion. Maybe folks thought a few more would jockey for position. But overall, I think Q3, though, was just an absolute blast to watch.
And I would probably say the qualifying session of the season to date so far, just on how it went. But it starts off with another mistake by Norris.
It's one of those moments where, considering the pressure he has on his shoulders, and it's not new pressure at this point in time, I am surprised to see it, particularly when for the longest time he was the guy who would get pole but couldn't convert. Now he's making the mistakes before he even gets on pole.
Mhm.
I'm at this point looking at my two drivers. If I'm working at McLaren, we've got the supposedly senior guy who keeps having these errors and costly ones at times come about, whereas we've got the younger guy who really seems to be pulling it together and delivering the way we'd expect him to in the machinery that we've got, if not overperforming, given, this is really only his third full season with the team. So I don't know. It raises, I think, a lot of eyebrows and questions in the McLaren garage right now.
Well, and also too, like he really beat himself up again after that crash into I think it was the turn four wall, calling himself like an effing idiot. And it's like, dude, I completely understand where you're coming from, but like just the mental fortitude needs to be stronger for Lando, right? Because he's letting in a lot of the outside come into his headspace, I think, with regards to media comments he makes in the media and whatnot. And that's why I think a driver like Max this season has been very good because he's short to the point in his media conversation. He doesn't let that outside information in especially in an inferior car like the Red Bull is. That's why he's been able to push Lando into, in the World Drivers' Championship to date, in my opinion. And I fear that Lando is going to continue to keep making these mistakes. Now that he's not in the championship lead, he's going to have to he's have to fight harder to get back in, considering the form that Piastri's in.
I agree. He's only 10 points off, and a lot can happen, but he's got Max right on his heels. I think Max is only 2 points behind him at this point. We've got 12 points spacing everyone apart. But in recent years, I know sports psychologists have become a lot more important to many athletes, even outside of, I think everyone assumes like hockey players, basketball players, team sports. There's obviously a lot of egos to manage and stuff, so they come in, but we're seeing an upswing in golf and other stuff. And I'm wondering if now is the time where if there aren't a few of them working with some of these drivers in F1, it might be beneficial, especially to someone like Lando who really does have that negative self-talk and that we know isn't productive for anyone. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And that's why I think he needs like an Angela Cullen to be there by his side every weekend and just
Yeah.
be someone that he can talk to and, have like those sports psychologist meetings on the fly in that sense, right? And do tell him that you are a really good driver. You've won Grand Prix, you have pole positions, you can do this sort of idea. And I just because it almost should be relishing the fact that that there's competition in that second driver's seat, but he's based on the way he's been worried about that competition as opposed to relishing it in that regards.
And showing why he deserves the position that he's got. So
Exactly. But as you mentioned, so it was Q3 crazy. We had Russell set the time, set the fastest lap with like I think 4 minutes remaining, and then Piastri went on pole, a provisional pole, and then Verstappen goes on provisional pole with like 100th of a second.
it was
Actually, I think
absolutely,
it was 1,000th of a second at the one in provisional pole. It was like a
was it
thousandth of a
really?
second. Yeah.
It came, oh my goodness. I know I heard 100th, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came down to that. We were seeing at the end of that qualifying lap after lap being improved upon. I know at one point people were wondering if Max would even get the opportunity to be competitive because with about 4 minutes remaining on the clock, they pulled him in and were swapping out his tires. And so would he have enough time to do a warm-up lap if like before his flying lap and everything? But even when you were talking to them, they were doing the interviews after the race. They're asking Russell, they're asking Piastri how they feel about their lap and what they would have done different. They're like, honestly, like I can't, I'm so happy with what I did. That was great racing. I can't even think about what I'd do differently, right?
And to me, that's why Max is more put in that GOAT conversation now, right? Being able to take the third fastest car or fourth fastest car in the grid to that level where he was just so hooked up in that lap. It was a lot of fun to watch. And like kudos to Oscar because to be honest with you, I didn't really think anyone was going to beat his lap time because he set a new record lap time and then boom, Max came in with the with that record lap time for his pole position at 1:27.294 and I believe Oscar finished up at 1:27.304.
My goodness.
Well, that leads us into Sunday's race. And Sunday's race was characterized based on the first lap, in my opinion.
It really was, yeah. I
Uh,
think that set the tone for the next 49, well, 49.89 laps.
so going into turn one, I mean, Oscar had such a huge jump off the line. I think he had his reaction time was, don't quote me on this. I think it was like 300ths or 3/10ths quicker. Like he got to 200 kilometers, I think 3/10ths quicker than Max did
Wow.
on in that car. So he was able to get right to the corner, get ahead of him in the corner, and then forced. I don't know if he forces Max off, but I think that to be honest, corner one, that's his corner considering he was ahead at the apex. Max went out, never gave back the position, and then he got slapped with a 5-second penalty. Erica, was that penalty justified in your opinion?
You know what? I honestly could have gone either way with that call. I think in some ways, he should have given the position back because Oscar was ahead at the apex very clearly. But when you look at how things appeared from Max's point of view with his camera, it did look as though he was kind of being forced off the track by Oscar and had nowhere to go. It wasn't as if it was just a clear cut type of thing like we've seen in the past. What I do think was really interesting, though, was that he was given that penalty in the first place because the penalty wasn't like because he overtook on that corner when he went off. It was because both tires went over the line, and he made it very clear in that radio that that was not what was discussed in the
Mhm.
driver briefing with the race director, that the call they were making was in defiance of what they were told in the briefing.
And that creates like mass and I had this issue with the stewards last time, like last race, where they had Hulkenberg in the Q2, but after further review of his lap time set, they took away because of he exposed track limits, which then forced Albon to not be able to compete in Q2, right? How do you not have that time, right? So just it creates more distrust or lack of trust with the race with the drivers and with the stewards. And you can't have that in this type of sport.
You really can't. And to boot, it's an inconsistent penalty because in the past, when people have made the same type of error and been penalized, it's been a 10-second penalty, not a 5-second one. So that was a little confusing as well. I understand it was maybe some lenience because it was lap one and they know there's a bit of a racing incident going into the corner. But to then slap Lawson for the same type of penalty with a 10-second penalty later on, as opposed to the five, it's not even that they're just applying rules willy-nilly that make no sense. It's that they're inconsistently applying them. And I personally feel like I'm having flashbacks to the 2021 season when that's happening.
Well, and I was also surprised that they never really gave Max an opportunity to give the place back because after this, because the safety car was right after that, right, with the crash, Sonoda and Gasly. But usually there's a time period where they allow for like Max to give place the back, but they were negotiating. Obviously each driver makes their case, right? And sometimes there is like a steward direction that says, okay, Max, we think you should give the place back to Oscar, which in my opinion, he could have been able to do in a strategic spot. Obviously, still give him back and not get penalized. But with the safety car hit, I thought the timing of the penalty was crazy because once the safety car was ended, the 5 second penalty got slapped on him right away.
There wasn't even an opportunity for him to consider it, really.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was
it was
like
pretty wild.
incident, accident, safety car, penalty. There was no chance to really be able to comprehend the idea of giving the place back.
And I know that there were a couple laps for the safety car, but even then, it was not one of the longest safety cars we've ever seen. It was pretty easy for them to move Pierre's car off of the track, especially with Tsunoda being able to limp his way back to the pits. But I think it was pretty crazy. It did give us some exciting racing and really changed the strategy. I don't know about you, but there were so many calls on radios of people trying to guess what strategies other people were doing and adjusting on the fly. It was very entertaining. But it really did, and I know Max has very strong feelings about it, and he's bit his tongue because he doesn't want to risk being fined. But it truly was a bit of a heartbreaking moment, I think, for him when it could have been such a morale boosting thing for him and the team with some of the struggles they've had starting this season compared to the last few years.
And I also think from an entertainment and a racecraft perspective, it would have been more interesting if they just said, okay, you're gonna have to give after reviewing of it, you're gonna have to give Oscar the position back on the next lap. Otherwise, it's a 5 second penalty.
Yeah.
And then I think with the no penalty, then it creates like a greater fight for P1 because obviously Oscar's got a really fast car and he was dynamite when he had clean air. But Max was very good at, he was also dynamite in clean air. And I think he would have done well following Oscar in the dirty air and having, excuse me, those battles, which to the point where that's what you want to watch, right? That's the whole point of sport is to race, not
Yeah.
just drive around a track for 50 laps and not really get tested.
Well, unless we're in Monaco, but that's besides.
Yeah, it's a showcase at that point.
But yeah,
But
I think it was pretty crazy. I mean, we did get some good action immediately after, things resumed with George really putting pressure onto Oscar, but I think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he gave the position back and it was Max on his tail and, they're restarting the race and it's just all this chaos at the back of the grid as well. So I don't know. It was, don't get me wrong, still a very entertaining race, but a little bit of a damper to have that go on so early on in the
I, I,
50 laps.
I did like the DRS chicken in the final
Yes.
turn again between Lando and Hamilton. So in 2022, they had that line before the final turn, and then after now they have it after the final turn, that detection line, right? But still, both are playing chicken going in, and Hamilton, knowing his experience, he's like, okay, I'll let Lando take the first corner. Or take the last corner because I'll get him going into turn one and then be able to navigate my way until the next DRS point anyways. So, and then Lando finally caught on after 3 laps. He goes like, maybe I should just hang behind.
Exactly, because I think he was a little overconfident, especially on lap 14, that second one where they went around, because Hamilton kind of brake checked him a bit, like unexpectedly, really, like hit the brakes to force him to go ahead. So he finally did manage the permanent overtake on the
Mhm.
15th lap and quickly took down Antonelli, who had been gaining advantage over this series of fights that were happening
Yeah.
in the midfield there.
I thought this was a weird race for tire degradation because some people got really hit hard on tire deg and some people didn't. I mean, like Leclerc was able to sing those mediums to about lap 30, which I thought was super impressive. But at one point Norris on the hard was on the same pace as Oscar on the medium. It was weird.
It was one of those, especially considering like how much space was between them. Piastri was in P2, had a couple seconds to max, and Norris is on these old hards doing kind of like the same thing on a newer set of hards. Like you really kind of have to question what's going on, especially because I don't think you expect weird things to happen at Jeddah, right? Because it's always going to be really hot when we're kind of starting the day as the track cools and we've got track evolution from the cars on. It's going to do things to your tires anyway. But we were even seeing like George really complaining about tires with a couple laps left, even though it really hadn't been that long on the hard tires at that point. So, and a lot of the drivers really talking about temperature and all kinds of things because they can see a little bit of that in front of them. But I think this was one of the most, what are you seeing on your side, race engineer? Please tell me because I'm a little concerned about the data I've got in front of me
Mhm.
when it came to tires.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone was trying to work that one-stop strategy, right? Either medium to hard, hard to medium sort of idea. Um, like for instance, I thought who had a really great race was Hadger. He did the hard to medium, and he overtake on Alonso early off the restart with didn't require DRS, so he was able to get honestly like I look at one point and Hadger's up into P6 before he makes his pit stop on the hards, and I'm like, oh, this is a good drive. And then coming back out, he got caught in the Williams. Like they worked that strategy to perfection. I think Sainz was incredible this weekend, both in strategic driving and really being playing the team game, keeping Albon in his DRS so that he could fight off Hadger, who was like on the better tire, similar to Singapore a few years ago. So that was, good on Williams that weekend to score 6 points, and now they move up into the fifth place in the constructors now. But who stood out for you in terms of driver of the day or drivers of the day?
Drivers of the day, I really think you do have to give a hand to Piastri, of course, because he really held on to that and went. But even some of the young guys, I was really impressed with them. Like Hadger, to your point, who's someone, it's not like I watch a ton of the junior leagues and stuff to have seen him like come up in the previous years, and especially when the Racing Bull car has really struggled for the last few years as well. So it's just proof again that you can have talented drivers and what we typically consider subpar machinery, and they really can turn it around. Um, I was also pleasantly surprised. Who else came to mind here? Um, Again, with Lando making a bit of a mistake here, some very like junior looking moves. When he came in for his pit stop, he had a bit of an issue when he was coming into the pits, almost didn't slow down enough in time, was kind of like late getting ready to go.
Yeah.
And then on the exit, he almost went over the line and got himself a penalty. And I'm sitting here like, of all the things you can control in a race,
That's
I
one of them.
really kind of think that's one you should maybe have a little bit more
Yeah.
under your belt. So.
Well, speaking of Lando, Eric, okay, so this is the question I kind of posed to myself last week, and I figured when we talk about, I keep hearing Zach Brown, and it's so annoying. Oh, we got two number one drivers, two number one drivers. That doesn't work. I mean, in theory, if you have two number one drivers, you also have two number two drivers,
Yep.
right? So in Oscar, if he didn't have that spin in Australia, he would be miles clear ahead in the championship right now as we stand, in my opinion. At what point does, because earlier on in the season, right, they'd be saying the number one drivers, Oscar would be doing well, but then they would be favoring Lando in terms of strategy, right? And it'd be Lando's mistakes that would cause it that Oscar, Oscar hasn't made mistakes. He made one spin-off mistake and he still scored points. But I
Yep.
mean, other than that, he's been clinical. Like three of the last four races have been his. At what point do you say, let's put our eggs in his basket and get him a World Drivers' Championship? Because the point I make to Ricci is that the constructors is great for money and bonuses and whatnot, but at the end of the day, no one gives a shit about who won the World Constructors Championship. It's all about the Drivers' Championship when it comes to, people remembering from that year.
Well, and that's it. We're not sitting here talking about how McLaren's going to become the nth time champion at the end of the year. We talk about will Lewis get his eighth
Yeah.
championship? He's tied as GOAT with Schumacher for the seventh. Yeah, Schumacher is synonymous with Ferrari and all that stuff, but we're talking about the driver. And to the further point of it, I do think they need to make a decision because, yes, you're both sitting at the top of the pack right now, but things change so fast throughout a season, and they kind of shot themselves in the foot last year with papaya rules.
Mhm.
They didn't want to make a decision. They wanted to give each of them a chance at glory because it didn't really do anything for their points. And honestly, I do think it kind of cost Lando the championship last year because if they'd been a little bit more strict, like we had seen Mercedes do in years past, where it was Hamilton's number one, Bottas, you're the number two guy, and you're making sure he's away and clear for the race. I honestly think Lando could have narrowed that gap. There were several points they just kind of gave away through that. And I think they need to avoid making that same mistake, especially people are going to be looking at Piastri now. We know the machinery is so close. We're
Mhm.
seeing him put on this masterclass week over week. He is calm, cool, collected, composed. He is a great mentor in Mark Webber, the previous Aussie leader of the World Driver Championship 15 years ago. And yes, McLaren's at the top now, but if you want to keep him, if you want to build momentum behind what you've got to keep him happy. And drivers are happy when they're winning championships. You don't want to risk someone sweeping in with new regs when the
Yeah.
car's taking off in a few years. If this is the guy you want to attach your cart to, if this is the horse you're trying to attach that cart to. So, in my opinion, you really need to make a decision. And if I'm Zach Brown and I'm looking at the available information, particularly from the last two seasons in front of me, I have to go with Piastri as the guy that's the future for my team and that I'm putting as my number one driver going forward.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sure people have opinions about that, but I genuinely think he's the one that will get not just the team, well, we'll definitely get the team where they want to go, but we'll also see some of that repeatable success in the years to come.
yeah, and I think Miami will be another test of that. It's kind of a similar circuit in, fast corners, slow corner. It's going to be a sprint race. It's going to be, I think it's a sprint race in Miami, if I'm not mistaken. But nevertheless, if Oscar keeps at the pace that he is right now, there's no question in my mind that he should be the number one driver at this point in the league. Because in theory, he could be leading the championship by 20 points as opposed to 10.
Exactly. And it is a sprint race in
Oh, there
Miami
you go.
next
See,
week, Miami-Dade
it,
Point.
I mean,
And
if
I think it will be a good test for McLaren too. This is where Lando took home his first win last year, right? So
to me, if Oscar wins both the sprint and the GP this weekend, he's the guy, and you can't question that. Unless something drastically happens, you can't question it
which
if you're in the McLaren garage.
Lord knows it's possible, knocking on wood, that
Yeah.
something could happen, but we're hoping it doesn't. But we
Well,
saw the destruction Papaya rules did last year with an inability to make a decision. I think, to your point, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot and end up losing the whole bag if you don't make a decision this year as well. And so look at the information, choose the guy you think is right. And honestly, it could be the younger guy, as heartbreaking as that is. But Lando's been in the sport for several years now. He's had some opportunities. You got to be thinking about the future,
yeah.
not just what's in front of you right now.
Yep. No, I agree. And so that's kind of our review of the that is our review of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. To end it, there was a bit of a rumor mill today. Saw on Twitter that Horner and Russell were talking informally after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I don't know if they were talking about dinner plans, if they were going to get pizza later on, or is there a point where Max is not happy, obviously, in the car because it changes from week to week based on what the media is saying, based on how the performance is, yada yada yada. But I can see a world where Stroll is ousted by his father, saying, we or Alonso retires. One of the two happens, right? Max moves to Aston Martin because of the Honda partnership, money, as well as Adrian Newey design cars. And then Horner's now in a position where he needs to find another driver. And he goes to George as a starting point. So what do you make? Like, obviously, they're rumors and it's an informal conversation, but could we be on the precipice of silly season?
It wouldn't be the first time that something really wild has happened. Think of February last year with Hamilton confirming he was moving to Ferrari when those rumors were going around. Our jaws all hit the floor. And I kind of feel if you're George, maybe you are sniffing around a bit. Yes, you were with Williams, you're reserved for Mercedes, you've moved up in a seat, but you have inherited a car that is objectively not as dominant as the one you thought you were getting a few years ago. So maybe you're curious what else is going out there. The Red Bull is probably on par, and we know Red Bull's got healthy budgets. So if they want him enough, I can see a way that they might be able to coax him over to the team.
What a swift kick in the nuts that would be to Toto Wolff to lose his top two drivers in back-to-back seasons, if that was to happen.
I think there would possibly be discussions of a change in leadership at Mercedes at that
Oh,
point. Because I mean, people knew Lewis wasn't going to stick around forever, but to go to Ferrari as opposed to maybe one of the teams a little further down the grid was probably a shock. And if you've now got the young guy who, for the last season or two, Lewis was with you, you were kind of putting your eggs in this guy's basket instead of Lewis's, is also leaving within a short period of time and not sticking around for the tenure you thought. You're probably
yeah.
wondering if maybe a change in leadership is warranted at this stage of the game.
But we shall see, right? If rumors come to pass or, if rumors go to, fizzle out. So that is this week's episode, season five, episode seven of the F1 podcast. Erica, thank you so much for joining us this week. It has been a pleasure seeing you again. And we have no race this week. We got Miami in 2 weeks. Should be exciting. Any final thoughts?
I'm excited to see what the rest of the season has in store. I know we've got a whole bunch of people eyeing different teams. Silly season, I have no doubt will come upon us at some point. And I'm excited to see this pretty talented onslaught of new rookies develop a bit more as the
Yeah.
season goes on. We've seen some exciting faces in the top 10, some new talent emerging, and I think it's going to just continue to evolve from here on out. So onwards and upwards for the rest
Oh,
of 2025.
love it. Onwards and upwards. Follow us at link or follow or yeah, access our link tree to follow on Instagram, follow, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Connect with us. Leave us some comments. Do you like what we think in terms of the race? Should Oscar be number one? Should Lando be number one? Is George leaving? Is George not leaving? Let us know.
We
But
don't know.
until next time, we will be reviewing the Miami GP in a couple weeks, and we can't wait to see what goes on, especially if Oscar, if he takes those next two, he should be the set sails and give him the drivers' championship nod for sure.
I wouldn't be opposed.
Awesome. Well, everyone have a great day and stay safe out there.
Bye.